minutes just for everyone to be able to get onto the webinar. We don't have all of our attendees here yet, so just hang tight and we'll start in a minute or two. Good morning for those who have joined us. This is Sherry with Generations United. We're just waiting a couple of minutes for everyone to be able to join the webinar before we get started. All right, good morning. We have a lot to cover today, and at least a lot of preliminary background information that I'm going to be sharing, so I figure I'll go ahead and get started. We may still have some people joining, and we'll just try to get people's information as it gets started. Again, my name is Sherry Steinig. I'm the Special Projects Director at Generations United. And I'm really happy to have joining us today Nancy Hankin, who's the Executive Director of the Intergenerational Center at Temple University. We'll do some introductions in a couple of minutes. So this webinar, we are going to try to do it a little different today and make this more interactive, and really the success is going to depend on your participation. So I hope that you will be able to think. I know many people are working in groups there. We'll have some time where you can stop, talk amongst yourselves, come up with questions or comments that you want to share, and then share through the webinar interface. I know that some of you have sent questions or challenges to Kathy ahead of time, and thank you for those. We'll do our best to respond to those. But again, we want to hear your ideas, brainstorm around some of the key strategies we're going to talk about today, and really work to help you strengthen your intergenerational work in your cities. So I'm quickly going to go over some of the housekeeping items. Oh, so since there's no video, but there's a chance to just see Nancy and me and our happy faces this morning, because we are happy to be here. So we're going to send in a couple of minutes a poll out to you so that you can respond about who's attending. But just so you know, we have experienced some challenges with this technology before. There may be a delay moving through slides. Sometimes there's an issue with sound if you're using your speakers on your computer. You can also use the telephone feature and call in through the telephone and still watch the slides then, so it gives you both the chance to use your mic and speakers or your telephone. So you can just kind of switch through that if you're having issues. Also, we're not able to stream video through this webinar service, so I've asked, and we'll give you a chance again, if you could on a browser open up www.communitiesforallages.org. That's 4 words, Communities for All Ages put together. And then in a couple minutes, we'll be referencing some material on that site. At this point, everyone but the panelists are muted. We are hoping that when we have our question and answers, if you do have a mic or are calling on the phone, we can unmute you and you can ask your question. There's also the feature for questions in chat where you can type those into us, and we'll be sure to capture those and respond. Nancy and I will go silent for a period of time so that you can have discussion and type in your questions. So it might be a good time to pick someone in the room to be your note taker or your typist, the person who's going to ask the questions. So just to test out the technology right now, we're going to start a poll, and you should be seeing on your screen right now a poll with different titles of the types of people that might be in the room with you today. If you can click all that apply, and if you click other, it might be helpful just to try to type out in the chat function who might be the other people in the room, if it's someone from a community organization or a school board or something that just doesn't fit those categories that I listed. And as our results are coming in, it looks like we're kind of half city staff and other, so we'd appreciate if you could sort of share who the others might be so that we can get a sense of the audience. The other challenge through using this type of technology is that Nancy and I are in different cities, so we'll both be talking, but we can't sort of give each other any cues about whose turn it might be to talk. So we appreciate your patience and your participation in what we're doing. Did we get any comments yet? Questions or comments? That's great. Kathy, thank you for responding that the MARC staff is the others that are involved at their site. You can close the poll. Okay. So we have 2 hours blocked for this webinar. We don't anticipate that we're going to take the full 2 hours unless there's enough questions and discussion that needs to come up. But even then, I don't think we'll take the 2 hours. We probably have about an hour of time, but again, based on what sort of questions and discussion that you're interested in, we'll move forward from that. Then finally, we are going to be recording the webinar, and it'll be available at the Generations United website, and I'll also send a link to Kathy from the recording so that she can be sure to share it on the Communities for All Ages website there in Kansas City. So today we're going to have a discussion around Communities for All Ages and how intergenerational or all-age strategies can strengthen your work. We're going to talk about 3 key strategy areas. Creating new alliances and partnerships, increasing resident engagement, and building welcoming and inclusive communities for people of different races, ethnicities, and aging, as well as sharing some resource sites, and then again having an opportunity for your questions and discussions. And then hopefully we'll leave you with some topics and some questions for you to continue the conversation in your cities and collectively across the region there. So before I turn it over to Nancy, just to give you a little bit of background on me and my organization, as I mentioned, I'm Sherry Steinig. I'm the Special Projects Director at Generations United. I've been here for almost 15 years, and I'm responsible for leading our efforts here to promote and support the development of intergenerational programs. I do a lot with developing resources and sharing those resources and trying to connect practitioners around the country. So for you in Kansas City that are doing this work, and hopefully we'll share some examples, and then following this call, if you want more information, what I'd love to do is connect you with the people doing the work in other cities. Prior to coming to Generations United, I worked for an organization in Seattle, Washington, where we developed a school and community-based intergenerational programs. So although I haven't actually developed an intergenerational program in a couple of years, that is where my background is. And Generations United is a national organization, and we work to promote policies and programs that strengthen intergenerational relationships between people of all generations. We're based in Washington, D.C. In addition to our intergenerational community work, we also do a lot of work around encouraging the use of shared spaces and facilities between generations, and we do a great deal of effort supporting grandparents and other relatives who are raising their grandchildren. So those are our primary areas of focus. I'm going to now pass it to Nancy to talk a little bit. She'll introduce herself and talk some about the Communities for All Ages work that's going on across the country.
Thanks, Sherry. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'm in Philadelphia and delighted to be able to have this opportunity to share some of our lessons learned and to kind of work with you to see how you can move your communities forward to be communities for all ages. Just a little bit about me. I started this work 36 years ago. I can't believe it. I was in my early 30s. I had a 3-year-old, and I am now 67. And I have 2 little grandchildren, and I've done a lot, seen a lot, worked really hard to try to change the way we look at generations living side by side in communities and what we can do to, foster kind of connection and really good joint problem solving. I founded the center 36 years ago when people weren't talking about aging so much and certainly weren't talking about intergenerational work. We've developed model programs that address issues like fostering immigrant integration, supporting youth, supporting older adults, looking at supporting caregiving families, and then we've provided a lot of training and technical assistance around the country and internationally to help other people do this work, and we've developed a lot of materials that hopefully can be resources for you. And I think that there's a list at the end of websites, and on our website, templeigc.org, you'll see lots and lots of resources there. So for many years, I was really working on intergenerational program development, and I think was maybe the used car salesperson of intergenerational work. Any issue you could come up with, we at Temple tried to develop a program where young people were helping older people helping young people, or together they were helping others. And as you'll see in our website, we have lots of examples of that. But about maybe 10, 12 years ago, I saw programs come and go and started really wondering, what do we have to do to change the culture, change the norms in communities? And how do we get people to really strengthen the social compact, the obligations, we have to each other over time? So got some grants, started doing focus groups around age-friendly, child-friendly, family-friendly initiatives, and started seeing how much convergence there was, that actually young families and older people and parents with little children or middle-aged people all want safe communities. They all want opportunities to learn, good educational systems. They all want beautiful communities. They want opportunities where people can give back and where people feel empowered. So we came up with an idea of Communities for All Ages. We tested it in Arizona, worked there for about 4 years, expanded to Westchester County, New York, and then got a Kellogg grant to go to 8 other states. So in the end, we ended up working with about 23 communities. And I think the core of this is it's really about bringing generations together to address the needs of everyone in a community and engaging everyone to look at issues that affect people across the life cycle. So rather than looking at maybe a health issue like obesity prevention just for kids and another diabetes prevention for older adults, that generations would come together, understand how whatever issue it was affected different age groups, and then come together and say, what can we do effectively and strategically to address this issue from a lifespan perspective? It's been an incredible learning for me. I think it's incredible learning for all our communities, and we're now at the point where we want to share a lot of our learnings, share some of the challenges with others, because I think, as you all have seen, that just talking about aging doesn't necessarily get everyone involved, and that, an all-age approach and thinking about aging as a process from, birth to death. It's kind of like, this is what we do. After we're born and before we die, we age. And I think if we can promote that idea, then we can get people interested in building communities that are good for older people, today's older people, as well as communities that are good for tomorrow's elders. So and you'll be able to see this later if you go to our Communities for All Ages sites. So Communities for All Ages is a vision of a place that intentionally engages people of all ages to work together. It's a lens that supports kind of the concepts of interdependence and shared fate, that idea that we're in this together, we're not competing with each other. And it's a way of acting. It's like, how do organizations, city officials, institutions work together to improve the outcomes of all community members, not just one age group. We've seen, we were in places like Itabena, Mississippi, tiny place in the Delta, to San Clemente, California, the north of Minnesota, down in Florida, in Westchester. So I think that a lot of our lessons learned really can be applied to different kinds of communities, and I know the six groups that are involved are somewhat different. All the groups, just real quick, all the groups did an assessment, they did planning, and then they selected an issue they could address from a multi-generational perspective. Often that was safety, health, not much on housing at this point, lifelong education, and immigrant integration. And they developed their plans of action, but through this all, it was kind of a combination of addressing an issue, but also building trust and connectedness across generations. And that was one of our big learnings, that it really is about both, that you have to build social capital so people feel a sense of community in their neighborhoods. They feel a sense of pride, and they're able to, work together, collective action, and that's much more effective. We use basically 4 strategies: developing alliances, engaging residents of all ages in leadership roles, creating places and practices and policies that promote interaction and build trust, and looking at issues kind of from this life course perspective, again, rather than just one age group. And we had lots of great outcomes around people being more engaged, more trust, and concrete changes happening in communities. And I'm going to show you a video in a minute, but I think that some of the lessons we learned was that it's not just about young and old. It really is about all generations, and we have to start thinking about how all generations can live side by side. This approach is a really effective entry point for bridging historical divides, and we'll talk about that later too, but really looking at how do you foster town-gown, like relationships between colleges and communities. How do you cross racial and generational divides? And I think we've seen a lot of progress in that, and it's still quite challenging. We also learned that it's really important to have gathering places in communities where multiple generations can come together to learn from each other, to work together, and to really create a welcoming community. So there's lots of stuff on our website. That was a really brief overview, and I think our video will be helpful, but I would encourage you to look at our lessons learned report to see some of the specific outcomes. Sherry, is that enough about Communities for All Ages specifically?
I think that's great. Thank you. So we're going to switch, and we'll put a slide up right now that has the web link again. So this is about a 6.5 minute video, a little bit less than 7-minute video. So we're going to take a break from our talking right now for you to navigate to that website, and right on the homepage there you can see where the Communities for All Ages video for New Rochelle is there. You can take a couple minutes to watch the video, and then we'll start back up. Okay, we're thinking that probably if everyone got to the video got it to work, we should be wrapping up now. If you still need a couple seconds, couple minutes to finish it up, if you want to just type something in the question box.
Sherry, do you want to see if anyone has any comments or questions about the video before we move on?
Oh, absolutely. So as everyone's coming back into the webinar interface, we'd love to hear just even feedback, comments, questions on the video. I know for myself, we've used this video quite a bit, sharing it with other communities, and what I just find so valuable is, Nancy, you've done a great job showing sort of engagement and passion from people of all ages, and just how important and how beneficial that type of opportunity for having that sort of cross-generational dialogue, and what those results can be for people really feeling empowered and valued and their voices heard.
Any other questions before we kind of move on?
I don't see any questions that have come in. If people are trying to type in questions and we're not getting them, I'm always a little leery of this technology, making sure that it works. I know we've gotten a couple of comments from the question box, so I know that it's working, at least for some folks. But we do hope that you'll put your questions in, that you'll put your, oh, and we just got one saying that there were no questions, so excellent, it's working.
Okay.
So do you want to continue?
Sure. So right. Okay. So how can intergenerational all-age approach strengthen your efforts? One of the things that we haven't talked about as much as growing demographics is the changing demographics in terms of young and old in our communities. And if Kansas City area is similar to many other areas around the country, there's a growing racial generational divide. Right now, about 80% of older adults are white, and the young people particularly under 5, but young people under 21 are growing and soon will be majority minority. So there's some interesting dynamics happening, and one of the things we have to think about is how do we build trust across diverse groups? Will older adults invest in the lives of young people on whom they will be depending as they grow even older? And will young people feel connected to older people and support the policies that will help people as they grow older? So as we think about how do we strengthen the social compact, one of the things that an intergenerational or all-age approach to community building does is it builds public will among generations to invest in each other and increases community support. So we talk a lot about the needs to support people as they age. Again, if you look at aging from birth to death, we want to think about how can communities support and empower people at every stage of life, and how can we get this sense of public will, this commitment to do this in a really cost-effective and authentic way. And as we look at the changing demographics, how do we get older adults to invest in the rising Latino community? I know that's a very large community in the Kansas City area, because these will be the people they depend on in future years. And how do we understand the needs and assets of both young people and older people and really build on their strengths? So I think, as we do this work, we see that more and more people feel like this is aging is a process that we all have to think about, and it's our responsibility to work together to make sure people can age well. The second issue, and these are all domains within the World Health Organization age-friendly framework. So we know that an all-age approach can promote respect and inclusion. And we see that if you can be intentional, and that's probably my favorite word, be intentional about creating opportunities for real meaningful interaction across age, across race, across ethnicity, that we can dispel a lot of age-related stereotypes and really foster empathy, which unfortunately I think is missing among many people today. And we also know that this approach can really increase the inclusion of isolated older people as well as disconnected youth. And finally, I think when you think intergenerationally and act intergenerationally, you can increase civic engagement and you mobilize generations to support each other and to work together to address community concerns. And we're going to spend a lot of time, or some time, talking about how do you engage people at different stages of life. Okay, so we're going to go on to key strategies. Right. So the first strategy, and obviously you all come from different parts, I guess, city government, and maybe there's some residents and some other organizational people there, but we found in our work that this is easier said than done, creating new alliances. Sometimes it's easier to kind of think about who you normally work with, and we all work in silos, unfortunately. So part of the challenge is, how do you think about new alliances, people who haven't been involved, or borders you haven't crossed yet? So whether it's within city government, across health or safety or education, youth, aging, whether you create opportunities there, or whether you look out to work with school districts or work with neighborhood associations. The challenge is, how do you create sustainable new alliances that really are mutually beneficial? And how do you help people come together to create a shared vision? And this was interesting in our, our various communities. How do you come together and figure out what's common ground? You don't want to ask people to give up anything. You don't want to ask people to not focus on their target population. But how do you help people say that it's an added value, we'll do better if we have collective efforts to improve education for kids that extends throughout the lifespan and provides opportunities for older adults as well? How do we look at caregiving, not as something just for adults with aging parents, but also for parents who have children with, children with special needs? How do we create healthy neighborhoods from everyone? And I think, city government and all of you on this on the task forces really play a critical role in helping people think about who are the unlikely suspects. How can we be conveners of diverse organizations and institutions? How do we build capacity in our community? I saw that many of you have done some training workshops, but how could you also look at bringing diverse groups together to look specifically at how different age groups could reach out to each other? The important thing, though, is to make sure this is very authentic and real. And when you go to start a new alliance or bring people in, they understand what's in it for them as well. And it's not just come and join what we're doing and this is our mission, but it's really thinking about, what are your needs, what are your interests, what are we about, and how can we make this relevant to everyone? And I think that's sometimes challenging when we work in age-friendly communities, and with that framework, because we often say what's good for older people is good for kids, and that may or may not be true. And so I think we have to really start thinking about, how do we hear the voices of organizations representing youth, of children, of youth, and make sure that we are accurate in terms of what we see as strengths and challenges. I think that there are lots of ways to reach out to groups. Certainly colleges and schools, and I think a couple of you asked questions about that, are likely allies. It's sometimes not easy to work with school districts. I've worked with many school districts, and there are lots of challenges. I think Sherry can talk a little bit about what happened in Georgetown, Texas, and I'll talk about a couple of other places where we looked at work with colleges.
Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, one of the initiatives of Generations United is to recognize, we've been working with the MetLife Foundation to recognize the best intergenerational communities in America, and one of our first communities that we recognized was Georgetown, Texas. And one of the reasons that the review panel that selected the recipients were so impressed with the work is that the city has taken a really holistic view to their intergenerational programming efforts, and done a great job to infuse it and build partnerships between city government, the nonprofit organizations, religious institutions, school districts, and businesses. They had a whole neighborhood revitalization effort that focused on the new spaces that they created being intergenerational spaces. But the other unique aspect about the city that is what they've struggled with in the past is that they have a large Sun City retirement community there, and knowing that they viewed that as an underutilized asset in their community, and the school district, the independent school district, has built some really strong partnerships with that aging community, which is sort of a city within the city, and has led a number of intergenerational program efforts. They've done from your typical mentoring and tutoring programs. They also co-sponsor a senior spelling bee. They have joint performances with the high school and Sun City choirs. They do veteran recognition programs. They also send school buses to Sun City for their booster club, so that they can help residents get to high school ball games. So they've had a real good connection between the two communities. That Sun City really feels like the schools are their schools, and then the residents are actively involved in the activities there. And they've had some beneficial results. We know that in the elections a couple years ago, the voters from Sun City overwhelmingly supported the passage of a local school bond issue, and this was at a time where they were alone in Central Texas. We're the only community where the school bond issues passed. So that building of that connections and those relationships to a variety of different mechanisms has really been beneficial to the school district and the city government.
And I'm just going to add that I think, again, going back to what's the customer benefit, what would schools get out of this? When you start looking at how to involve schools in this work, many schools have service learning initiatives where they want students to become citizens of the world. They want students to learn a sense of social responsibility. Many curricula involve learning about your neighborhood. So really figuring out how involvement with older adults and involvement in the community service initiative can benefit students, can benefit schools, and can benefit neighborhoods. It's really important. So we've done a lot of work with schools, but also I think that sometimes groups don't reach out to community colleges, universities in a way that benefits everyone. And in a number of the communities we worked with, college students and administration really became key partners in building communities for all ages. And Itabena is this tiny, tiny little place in the Delta, as I said. It's primarily African American, and Mississippi Valley State is the university there. When you go to the community, you look down this road, and on one side is Itabena, where the residents live, and again, it's a very, very poor community, and the other side of the road is Mississippi Valley State. And for many, many years, there was absolutely no connection between the two. The students came and went. They never crossed the road to go into the rest of Itabena. Itabena residents felt very cautious and very reluctant to go on Mississippi Valley State's campus. By creating a communities for ages team, and I should say in every community they created a team that included public officials, residents of all ages, organizations serving different ages, churches, synagogues, etc. they created this community, and the former mayor became the head of the Communities for All Ages, and then she became mayor again. But in the interim between her two mayoral stints, she was coordinator of Communities for All Ages. And they decided that health was really the critical issue that they wanted to address. And so people from the university and older adults and youth and different organizations came together to really look primarily at prevention of obesity and access to fresh food and physical activity. And because they came together as a strong partnership, because they all saw that by working together they were going to get more done, great things happened. They created walking paths between the around the campus and between the campus and the rest of the community, so people are now walking together, getting physical activity, but also being exposed to each other and not being reluctant to interact. They had celebrations. They decided that fishing was a lost art, that older people knew how to fish and knew what to do with the fish, and young kids didn't, so they started having fishing rodeos where the whole community would come together. The older people would teach the kids how to fish, and then they'd all come together. And I can't be sure they didn't do a fish fry, but they were trying to promote other ways of cooking. They worked with churches who decided that they would try to have their gatherings and offer food that isn't fried, and that was a big deal for them. And mostly then they had students and faculty who started coming into the community as part of a service learning initiative to karate classes for kids, to teach aquatics for older people. And now there's much more of a sharing of resources, and there's a sense that we're Itabina. Itabina is the college. Itabina is residents that are young, residents that are old, families were in it together. And when the library was about to close, because they had so few resources, it was retired teachers from the community who came together and said, we're not going to let it close. And they volunteered their time until new resources came in. So I think that's a really interesting way of looking at how colleges can be connected. And I think I'll talk about East Jerusalem in a different area. Sherry, is that okay?
That's fine. I just want to add another one of our communities where the city has really led the effort to build strong alliances in Oberlin, Ohio, where they also have, there's Oberlin College, the city schools. There's also a large retirement community, Kendall at Oberlin. They've engaged community services. They have some of their churches. They have a local heritage center, the hospital, as well as other businesses to really infuse, develop, and encourage intergenerational programming across those paths there. And I know that the college has really embraced those relationships and really through service learning doing a lot to really support community organizations and the school district to get students involved and with the retirees that are at Kendall. So we're going to move on. We're going to still within this framework of building alliances. I know that some folks had replied to the questions that we sent out a couple weeks ago, but we're going to have another sort of moment of silence on our end for you to think and really kind of think about sort of who might be new partners. What challenges have you faced or can you foresee in those partnerships? And try to go ahead and share those with us, and we'll do our best to sort of respond right now to some of the current issues you're facing or ideas, share some ideas about what might be coming down the road, some pitfalls to maybe avoid. So again, we'll take a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can type in your questions. While you're typing them in, if you'd rather just we can unmute you, and if we'd rather have a conversation, that would be lovely as well. It'd be delightful. We'd love to hear your voices also. So we're just going to, again, just pause for a couple minutes. So thinking about building alliances. So responses to who might be new partners or challenges to those partnerships and alliances. I don't know if anyone's typing in questions right now. We haven't received any.
Is there anyone who could just say a question?
I know. Nancy and I get tired of just hearing ourselves. I think there's also the function where you can sort of raise your hand if you wanted to, click the little raise your hand button. We can unmute you and have a conversation. Oh, okay, we have one.
Yay! We give you a star.
Let's see. Okay, I think it just takes a second because there's a pin that Kathy's going to need to type in. But hopefully we'll hear you in a minute. We've heard from one community that they have a discussion going on while muted. So.
Well, that's good. We do want discussions going on.
That's right. Nancy, and we did get a question here that asks if you can give some specific ideas to engage students in K-12 about the importance of creating the community they want to come back to after college?
Okay, it's really interesting because it turns out that we worked with two small communities in northern Minnesota, Proctor and Moose Lake. And in Proctor, one of the things we did find was that people, maybe not necessarily after college, but even in college, after they had been involved in communities for all ages, were so connected to other people in the community that they kept their involvement while they were still going to college. And I think they anticipated that they were working on a community that was going to be good for them as well as good for older people. But in terms of specific ideas, I think so much of this is about helping children see that they too will be older adults someday and that older adults were once them. So whether that means, doing aging curriculum, bringing older people into the classroom, doing oral history projects where, it's about not only the past but also the future, having young people and older people work together on where was our community, 50 years ago, where is it now, where do we want it to go together, thinking about visioning, and envisioning about what a community would look like when they're older adults. So I think the more we can get people to understand that life is a journey, aging doesn't start at 65, and that they are aging at every point, and I just don't think kids really get this. I was once doing I don't know why, I was talking to a kindergarten class, and I usually don't talk to kindergartners, and one little kid raised his hand and asked me, where do old people come from? And before I even had a chance to respond, a little girl raised her hand and she said, old people come from other old people. And it was so striking. I mean, we all laughed, but I thought, really, children don't understand that if they're lucky, they will someday be older people themselves. And so the more we can infuse this idea into service learning, have opportunities, increase exposure of young people to older adults and bring older adults into the classroom. It may be mentoring, it may be tutoring, it may be joint community service projects, but I think all those things are important in K through 12 so that they can imagine so kids can imagine that their community will be a great place to live when they get to be the age of the people they're interacting with. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and I would just add, Nancy, and I know that this is things that I've learned from working with your staff, is sort of the importance of exposing or giving young people exposure to all different kinds of older people.
Right, right.
So it may not just be a partnership between an assisted living facility and a community, but sort of to have, active older adults, frailer older adults, sort of the whole range of diversity of experiences, so that there's just this richness that can experience. Now, it's the importance sort of across across the ages, and I know a lot of our communities that we recognize when we speak to the young people that live there, it's really the multi-generational experiences that they had and the idea that they see older people thriving in their community,
Right.
and that gives them a vision of, I could see myself after college or staying here to go to college or coming back here and growing old here, because I see people growing old here and loving growing old here. So part of it's something of a cyclical, sort of you build those intergenerational, multi-generational opportunities. People see them, they experience them, and then they can see that vision, that possibility. I see people who were like me or could be like me doing that. We had a couple more questions that came in. Wanted to know some of the new partners that some of the communities are thinking about working with are health clinics, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, or other youth organizations, the private schools, as well as public schools, elementary, middle, and high school, and then nonprofits of all missions, so sort of the whole gamut of the nonprofit sector.
I think that's great, and it sounds to me kind of like the communities of all ages teams that we try to develop in these places. I mean, again, you have to figure out the challenges. How do you find common ground? And how do you even create meetings and bring people together in a way that is appealing and addresses all of their needs? And so I think health clinics and health organizations, hospitals are really important. And again, if we look at the root causes of health disparities, it really is about all ages. It's about access to food. It's about lack of places to exercise. It's about lots of, lack of access to care. And so, if there's an intergenerational advocacy or campaign around health and you work with health clinics, that's great. There are lots of youth organizations out there that want children to develop those civic skills. Again, what's in it for them? Developing civic skills. They can do it by working with others. And the whole idea of what your role as city officials in bringing nonprofits together, I think, is critical. And I would love to, see more of that, where you really are the conveners and you really do help nonprofits see how they'll be better if they work together and can find common ground and address things, from this multi-generational lifespan perspective.
And I know that the Pam Smith from San Diego County was out there in December with my boss, Donna Butts, and a lot of San Diego, their current work around, they have a range of intergenerational work happening is really focusing on health and well-being, and I think there's a whole new level of partnerships and alliances that they've been able to develop around that common theme.
Right.
So some of the challenges that have been presented in this area are resources, particularly the time required, I think, to build these alliances, as well as time to determine the interdependencies between the city and the new partner. So sort of finding out what those common ground might be.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, this work is really powerful, and this work takes time. And it has to be sustained over time. So because it's about relationship building, it really does require an investment of energy and an investment of time, staff time, to understand what everyone's going to get out of it, what everyone needs, and what everyone brings to the table. So I think that's true. But if you invest, the results are amazing. but they're not going to happen just by magic. You want to move on to increasing resident engagement, or are there any other questions, Sherry?
Well, there aren't any other questions right now, and we can keep the questions coming. And a lot of this, I think what Nancy and I were talking about the other day, is these aren't sort of separate strategies. They really blend, and the examples sort of blend as we go through there. So feel free to keep typing questions as they come in. We have a time after each strategy, so we'll move on to the next slide, and increasing resident engagement.
So again, one of the big learnings we had was this is not just about city government. It's not just about nonprofits. It really is about city government and nonprofits working with residents, because residents are the ones who have lived and will live in these places, and they live side by side, and understanding how they can invest in each other, support each other, and kind of work together for the common good really is one of the goals of this strategy. So one of the things we learned early on is that it's very important to start building resident leadership. And there have been many leadership programs developed around the country. There are some older adult leadership programs, there are youth leadership programs, there are like leadership programs for board members, but there was very little that we could find that was intentionally designed to build the leadership skills of residents of all ages. So on our website, I think it's up there now, we're putting everything on the website now, so you have access to everything. There's a whole intergenerational resident leadership training program that anyone can use, and I think this has been piloted in 8 or 10 communities, and people are doing it, either the whole thing or parts of it. And it really looks at, again, bringing a diverse group of residents together and looking not just at how do you develop conflict management, how do you develop decision-making skills, how do you communicate, but really understanding how residents can be bridging leaders. They can be out there helping to understand what the assets are of different generations and bringing them together to do good things. And so I think thinking through how you would, as a city, build the leadership of people together, and how you could have ongoing groups of people who are, you then have this huge cadre. I think in Peekskill, New York, they did this, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 times. And so over a number of years, they have trained many, many people who now are out in the community and who do choose to get involved in commissions, who do choose to get involved in, working on community events, and who do feel this commitment to the community and the importance of addressing the needs of all people in the community. So leadership is one thing. Another issue is, I think it's really important to create a continuum of roles for people in a community, some kind of infrastructure. So we say we want people involved, but it's often kind of haphazard, and here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity. I don't know what kind of infrastructure there is for volunteerism or engagement in each of your communities, but thinking through an easy way in, so that there might be a way in if you want to work on this, or you want to help the town of, or the city of X, here are some ways you can do it. It might be organizing a special event. I know somebody mentioned planning a pumpkin event. Well, again, how can you use people's skills and the skills of different generations to come together and plan and expand that event? If you're having street fairs, if there's some advocacy issue, survey on commissions, but presenting people with a continuum of roles that they can move in and out of over the lifespan. I think another issue around engagement, and this is a whole, this could be a 10-hour discussion, just increasing resident engagement, so I'm just touching on a few things, is how do you message, how do you communicate why people should get engaged with their community? And it's really important to understand generational and cultural differences. The message that you send to a baby boomer might look a little different than the message you send to a millennial. The message you send to a Latino elder or someone in the Latino community might look different than a message to African American community or the white community. And it's not that there are set things, here's what you do for A, here's what you do for B. There's lots of information out there, but understanding cultural and age values and norms and messages is incredibly important. And so marketers often look at how do they create these creative briefs. This is one of my learnings, and they say, who is the target audience for your message? What do they want? What would appeal to them? What impacts them? And I think doing that kind of research as you think about whether it's, getting young people involved in an event or whether it's promoting, communities for all ages in general, it's really understanding who the target audiences are and tailoring your messages to them. Sherry, do you want to talk about intergenerational advisory or planning committees?
Sure. What we've also seen is, in addition to sort of including representatives of all ages on existing commissions or committees, we've also seen a number of communities that have worked on developing specific intergenerational councils, committees, advisory groups. These are, depending on the city structure, the government structure there, these are resident advisory boards that would be charged with either looking towards, there could be planning aspects of it, or in some communities it's just sort of ensuring that the intergenerational vision is happening. It's really ranged on how they've developed. In Shorewood, Wisconsin, it's their County Department on Aging developed an intergenerational council that they then adapted into their city. Parkland, Florida, it's through their Parks and Rec department. They have an intergenerational committee that helps with activity planning, engagement. In Dunedin, Florida, the Committee on Aging has a subcommittee on intergenerational, an intergenerational subcommittee. We also know that in West Sacramento, they have a Parks, Recreation, and Intergenerational Commission, and in that community specifically, they have a specific position on the committee that would be for a person under 18. So whereas every other person could be someone of any age, they're committed to having at least one youth voice. My recommendation would be to probably have a couple more youth voices. We know that
Yes.
there's a little bit more power when youth can collaborate with other youth, but it's a good start to doing that. And we even are working with another community right now that has received our Best Community Award recognition, and in talking with one of the other communities that did this, they're interested in starting a type of intergenerational community advisory board that would really be made up of members of all ages to really help shepherd their intergenerational practices. We've also had communities that do have strong intergenerational work that have teen advisory boards or a mayor's youth council. Some of those that have been really active in infusing sort of the intergenerational work into what the city is doing by bringing together a group of youth, and then part of what their charge is to think about intergenerational involvement and engagement. So there's different strategies to go about, but there is sort of that effective, again, it's somewhat of a joint leadership training program of having people of all ages equally around the table where all voices matter. That's developing, and a lot of communities seem really interested in exploring that type of engagement.
I wanted to add that this isn't necessarily easy, and whether you're doing an intergenerational advisory committee or whether you're bringing young people to the table where there's an existing commission and you want to bring people on board, you really have to think about logistics, and you have to really think about how to create a welcoming place for all ages. So often people never think about when they hold the meetings or where they hold the meetings. Is it a place where everyone feels welcome? Often in age-friendly initiatives, it might be at a senior center, it might be someplace else. Maybe there's another place where everyone feels comfortable. When are meetings held? Are they held in the middle of the day? Well, if they're held in the middle of the day, young people can't come. If they're held at night, many older people don't go. So those are, challenges to think about. And also, many young people don't really want to sit through a 2-hour meeting of a very strict agenda that's basically people talking to them. And so, thinking through how do you promote interaction? How do you create kind of activities within the meeting that are fun, that make use of people's perspectives? But again, being very intentional about that is important, because sometimes people go to the first meeting, young people find it really boring and not come back. And sometimes that reflects a lack of thought on the part of organizers and, are we really developing a way of meeting that will be appealing to them? Before do you want me to talk about some of these other places, Sherry? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Before I talk about those, just another way of engaging people through community events, and I know some of you are involved in, citywide community events. And I think one of my learnings over the last decade with Communities for All Ages is how important these events are, not just as separate events, but as mechanisms for building community pride and for bringing people together. And they can be either just plain old events that are the same as always, or they can be intentional in terms of what specific things could you do to get people to get to know each other differently. So we worked a long time in Ajo, which is a little town outside of Tucson in the middle of the desert. And there their commitment was to using the arts to promote connections across ethnic, racial, and age barriers. It's a community that has Native Americans, the Tonahono O'odham, Latinos, and many white people who come kind of from the east and go there during the winter. And they specifically use lots of art forms. I remember one was they made desert puppets. They made these huge puppets that different people, different generations came together, made them with an artist, and then they had this huge celebration where they walked through the town square carrying these puppets, and there were little kids carrying the heads and the older people at the back, or vice versa. And there was such a incredible sense of celebration and pride in doing this work. And as you think about street fairs or arts festivals or any kind of activities that bring people together, how can you build in activities that get them to do storytelling with each other, that get them to share photographs about the past, present, and future, that get them to, use the arts to understand what are the stresses that they're going through. And this is important too when you think cross-culturally. How can you create events that will honor the cultural heritage and the richness of the cultural heritage of different generations. But just to tell you quickly about a couple of good resident engagement stories, Moose Lake is a little place right outside of Duluth, and it is a place that has lots of retirees, but also a school district, and there really hadn't been a lot of intergenerational work done before the Northland Foundation got involved with something called an Age-to-Age initiative. And when we got involved and wanted to add value to the Age-to-Age, we were looking at what could be done to really particularly bring the retirees and young people together, and they had rejected a referendum for a new school, and it was really because of the retirees. So they started a committee. They got the mayor and the city council and the parks people, young people from the high school, older people who had been longtime residents, all together to look at what are some issues that affected everyone. And as in many communities, they thought about health and they thought about access to food. And they had this very ugly hockey arena. When you drove into the town, a yellow hockey arena, everyone hated it. And they started thinking about how can we come together to recreate this eyesore, to make it a center for lifelong wellness, and to really start thinking about how do we use the land around it. So they came up with lots of ideas, and what they finally settled on was building a pavilion on part of it that would house a farmer's market. And this advisory group of young people and older people and came together, and they worked with an architect for about a year and thought about what would they need. They did kind of focus groups. They talked to lots of people, and they planned this pavilion. And then the farmers market got involved, and they're all set to go. Everyone was very excited. Unfortunately, the rains came, and there was flooding in Moose Lake last year, and they couldn't do it. But my latest information is that the pavilion is now starting construction, and the farmers market will be there. And it's just a really good example of how everyone was so excited about working together on a common project. And at the same time, a lot of the older people started saying, well, you know, a lot of people here are interested in genealogy. Why don't we go into the classrooms and teach genealogy classes to the kids? And so at this point, there are lots of older people who are going in teaching classes. The young people are interested. The older people are interested. And don't you know that this year, the referendum passed? So Moose Lake is a good example of how a small community can bring people together to, really make things happen there. In Charlottesville, the Area Agency on Aging worked with a high school class when they were developing their area plan for aging, and they got students again to think about what would be good for older people now, what would be good for them as they get older, what would be good for their parents, and they created a whole portion of the Area Agency on Aging plan, and that resulted in many intergenerational activities in Charlottesville. In San Clemente, and this kind of overlaps with creating an inclusive community, San Clemente, we worked in the barrio in two very poor neighborhoods in San Clemente. And in these neighborhoods, there are a lot of very low income Latinos of all ages, many domestic workers, gardeners, service workers, etc. And they're kind of surrounded by a more wealthier white population. And there's been lots and lots of challenges. But one of the issues that we saw was that the Latino residents weren't involved in anything that was happening in San Clemente. There was a San Clemente collaborative that was city officials and organizations, but residents hadn't been involved at all. So through a lot of the work of the Orange County Human Relations Commission, they did leadership training. They actually went out to seek, how Latino elders can be involved as well as white elders. They did leadership training among youth with the elders, and they brought people together and engaged them in both advocacy and service to each other. So just in terms of civic engagement, in one community called Las Palmas, a neighborhood, some actually retired city officials decided that the kids were not doing well in school and they needed some support, so they created a homework club in kind of an apartment in a housing, like the community room in a housing development. And it was a wonderful opportunity for different ages as well as different cultural groups to come together to support each other and to make sure that kids got what they needed to succeed. And then there was an opportunity to go for $1 million grant to reconstruct a park near a local elementary school. And there's a lot of anti-immigrant feelings in this area and not very many constructive ways of dealing with them. So after this leadership training, a lot of the Latino elders, the older white elders, young people from different cultures came together and they advocated for this, going for this grant. And there was a lot of resistance among city council because it was in the Latino area around a local elementary school. But because all these groups came together and advocated together, city council felt that they needed to go forward and wanted to go forward, and they ended up getting $1 million grant to renovate the park and make it a park for all ages and have equipment for all ages. And it was just a really good lesson in how important it is for city officials and residents to work together to improve the physical infrastructure as well as, foster connectedness.
Nancy, I just want to add what struck me when you were just talking, and this sort of goes back to the earlier question about what type of activities can work in a K through 12 environment, is that it's that idea of resident-led activity development, and it just made me think about the community that we worked with in Arizona that had developed a computer club where young people would teach older people how to use the computer. And no young people ever participated in the program because it was created by the staff at the facility.
Right.
And they sort of did a redesign, and I'm thinking of even and it started to get better, but I think about another community that we work with through one of our youth-led intergenerational projects where the young person developed the computer club at the senior center and recruited his friends, and it's just been a really successful initiative. It was really because he did what he wanted to do. He saw there was a need, and he created it, and he's engaged from his friends versus that more top-down type of program development. And you sort of talked about Moose Lake, and people got involved, and they said maybe we should do tutoring. There's this spiraling that can happen through this relationship building and people feeling empowered to actually start something and make something happen.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so what is the role of the people on this call and city officials? I think it's creating the spaces, places, and opportunities for that to happen. And so really trying to figure out, are there ways to foster this, whether it's through training, whether it's through policies, whether it's through, creating shared spaces where people come together. Are there incentives that you can do? But I think there's a role in creating that kind of space where people can want to do this and feel empowered. We should probably get to questions about this point, and then, because we're actually using
I know we're using up time. We actually did get a question while we were talking, and this question from Kathy is for Emily and the folks in Mission, saying she thinks that they're currently asking for suggestions on names for a park, and would they consider working with Mission schools to get suggestions from students, school staff? Perhaps they're already doing something with the schools, but it seemed like a good time to ask to sort of get some involved, to sort of develop that partnership and get some engagement. Oh, and she wrote back, good idea. So,
yeah, and I think it's not, I think that's a great idea, but it's not only a name. Maybe there are ways they can actually do something in the park to make it a welcoming place for everyone. I mean, again, it's the intentionality. It's thinking, I remember I was in Japan a number of years ago, and there was a playground that was being built near a school in a little pocket park, and they actually had everyone in the neighborhood come together and think about how to design it so that it would be a great place for everyone to hang out. And so they did have, playground equipment next to benches, next to, health equipment, and, really thought very carefully about what would people of different generations, how would they benefit, what would they want in this kind of park, and why would they come? So I think it's a great idea to start thinking about that, again, beyond a name. It's just really what might it look like? Are there any opportunities to do something different? And in the work I did in Florida, there are a lot of places in parks that have little, they're like community centers right in the park. I don't know if that's the way it works in Kansas City, but they had never really developed any activities that brought different ages together right there, right in that area. And so just knowing that there's that opportunity, they started doing potlucks and other kinds of things that, again, built social capital.
Yeah, that also made me think about another colleague of ours from Penn State University who did a lot of intergenerational neighborhood planning, and part of their process was bringing the generations together to envision what their perfect park would look like, and it was very very creative and unrealistic originally, and then through sort of the facilitation got down to sort of some really, really creative ideas that were feasible, sort of not, just not just one giant skateboard ramp or whatever it might be. to really sort of get that. So it can be a fun process for building relationships, just having that
Right.
type of visioning. We got another question about some specific activities or ways to engage local churches in
Okay.
communities for all ages efforts.
Okay. And I did have a note to talk about ministerial alliances. We've worked with ministerial alliances, but also local churches. And I think faith-based communities are intergenerational institutions. Just by their nature, they have young people, they have middle-aged people, they have older people. But they often are just as siloed and age segregated as every other place in our community. So one thing we've done a lot and very successfully is to work with churches and synagogues to help them foster intergenerational connections within their own church. So that's the first thing, to have the youth group and the older adult group maybe do some discussion, some work together, some history work, some planning of the future, whatever, talking about even the background of the church or the synagogue and where it hopes to go, where it's been, or just getting people to know each other or to volunteer with each other. So there's one thing to help just in each institution do that. But another strategy that they did in Portchester, New York, which kind of moves into some of the welcoming community, is they brought together churches, some of whom were Latino, some were African American, some were white, some were different cultures, and they came together and did some gardening together. And they came together and did some oral histories together. So first they did it individually, then they came and they had young people from a Latino church interviewing older white people in another church. And then there's a shared plot outside of school, and they all cared for it and got involved in distributing the food to people who needed it in the community. So I think that churches actually play a key role in community. There are lots of older people there. Many churches are struggling with how to bring young people in. So how do you get their voices to the table, and how can you as city officials support them in, promoting connections within and across the religious community? I think it's something definitely worth exploring.
So we didn't have any questions right this point, so I didn't know if you want to just move in, because sort of a good transition right into inclusive communities, but let's just keep the questions coming as we're talking here.
So it kind of moves in naturally to thinking about, not only are we talking about cross-age, but we're talking about cross-race, cross-ethnicity, and cross-income. And I can't stress enough how much this has come up in all the communities we've worked with. And so, thinking about, many of you have done assessments, or their assessments have been done for you in your community. One of the questions is, have all the voices been heard at these assessments? Even if you're working on age-friendly, how do young people see age-friendly, and how do young people see their neighborhoods as good for them? We often do an exercise in many of the communities that, where there are focus groups and people think about what makes this neighborhood good for me at my age. And so you have young people talking about that, you have older people talking about that, you have families talking about that, and then you can see where is their common ground. But beyond that, when you have racial and ethnic divides, the question is this a welcoming place? And in Portchester, New York, which is a town outside of New York City, there's a growing Latino immigrant population and an older white ethnic population. And there's been enormous tension between the two over the years. And I think they started with just having community conversations, and they decided to have conversations everywhere and ask, is Portchester a welcoming place for all? And what they heard was that it is not. And so they decided to focus their efforts over a number of years on how do we make Portchester a place that is welcoming for everyone. And one of the things they did is they used to have some kind of arts festivals, but they decided to start a major arts festival called Portchester Fest. And they created a planning committee that was made up of young people, older people, middle-aged people, people from Latino community, African American community. They're very intentional about the diversity, and they started thinking about what kinds of activities could we do at Porchester Fest that would really honor the heritage of different groups. And so they made sure, again, intentionality is so important, that they not only had dancing and music and that represented different cultures, but they had activities where people would do murals together, that they would, do storytelling together, they would do all different kinds of arts activities, music together to kind of bridge those historical divides. So those culture events are really important. I mentioned community gardens. We saw people doing community gardens in Phoenix, all over Mississippi and Minnesota, all over. And again, you can have a community garden that's a community garden, or you could have a community garden that where you also build this trust and connection, and you honor cultural differences. So in Phoenix, there's an area where there are lots of refugees. And so there was, again, an effort to bring refugees in to talk about planting different kinds of plants and foods, and then talking about them and having potlucks. And so for many of these events, it's not just the one-time event. It's how can the one-time event start a conversation, start relationships building, increase, feelings of safety and trust. The other thing is look at places like libraries. In Tucson, the area we worked in had been mostly African American, and then there was a growing Latino population, and there was kind of a black-brown tension that emerged. And the librarian decided that the library should be a gathering place for all ages and cultures, and she started having films, discussions, potluck dinners that honored different cultures and different heritages. She started having workshops where older Native Americans would teach young Latino and African American kids how to make dream catchers. Those are. And there were, just suddenly there was a safe space for people to come and talk about things. And New Rochelle did this too. They used libraries and other places to bring people together and to have food together and enjoy each other. So, building a welcome, inclusive community can be hard. It can be challenging. I think we need to do this. This is who we are as a society if you look at our demographics. So one of the, I think, challenges for elected officials is to say, how do we message differently about who we are as a community, and how to talk about shared fate. We're all in this together. We value each other. We trust each other. We build on each other's strengths. We believe in inclusion and equity. And I think building communities for all ages opens an opportunity not only, to cross age, but to cross all these other issues and other divides that have really kept us apart. And certainly we see this all over the United States right now. And if cities and leaders can create spaces for people to get to know each other, break down some of those barriers, and really know how much they are dependent on each other for a good future. I think that's what we need to do. So what questions do we have about, again, this could be a 10-hour session just on building inclusive communities. Any questions?
Are there any challenges that your cities are currently facing, or with sort of the different sort of age and race and ethnicity divides? So I don't know, Nancy, if we want to move on to sort of our final question for folks, and we can maybe they can include the strategies that you've talked about around the the different areas and their responses.
Sure.
So I know we want to be mindful of time, and I know that we presented a lot of information, and I did want to reiterate, Kathy had asked if there was a way that folks could, if they were interested to want more information on any of these city examples or community examples that we have, that yes, either through Kathy or through Nancy and I, we'd be happy to connect you with those communities, people in those communities that could give you information about their initiatives and their work. But what we were just wondering, we presented a lot of information, and hopefully there's been discussions for those of you that are sitting around the table or around the desk together around what are some of the next steps that you can take to make your community a great place for growing up and growing older. And we'd just like to hear some feedback or your ideas, or what current work is undergoing that that you can think about. We have these ideas of the parks and the pumpkins and some other areas that may be able to at least for you to think more about, or as you're moving forward, that you may be able to build a stronger alliance with a youth organization, with a school, or better engage residents of all ages in decision making, and trying to make this sort of welcoming and inclusive community. And we'll give you a couple minutes to talk and think about it, but we'd really love to hear from you what your ideas are.
Great to do this through the mic versus through just questions.
I know we tried to get Kathy's mic live, but it looks like it didn't work. It's always these challenges of the technology. But we'll try again. If you want to raise your hand, we will try again. Well, we're hearing from a couple of sites that they need to sign off, so I want to just hop forward to the next slide real quick so we can make sure that we get our resources, some of the resource links in front of you. And again, this PowerPoint, I'll send it to Kathy. She'll get it out to you, as well as the recording of the of the presentation. So those will both be supposed to be available. We're doing a lot on one computer screen here. So what we presented here is a couple of websites. One, the Generations United website, the Temple Intergenerational Center site, Communities for All Ages. AARP has a great livable communities site. The Viable Future Center, again, great planning tools for communities. In the UK, the Center for Intergenerational Practice in the United Kingdom is doing a lot of work around communities for all ages. And then I know there was a question about workplace, multi-generational workplace issues, so I also wanted to put up a link to a guide that we worked on a few years ago. We weren't going to talk about that during this webinar, but wanted to make sure that we gave that to you. We've gotten some comments from folks right now. One comment is that one of the MARC staff listening in is with the Area Agency on Aging, and she managed the senior centers under a contract. She's excited about several ideas presented, which she will present to senior center directors, for example, working specifically with school districts. And just for additional information, I think both Nancy and I have a whole a number of resources about ways for senior centers to work with schools and doing intergenerational programming in senior centers. It's actually an area that I actually have personal experience as well. So there's some great resources that are currently available for that we'd be happy to share. Any other comments from folks? Well, this is a challenging call for Nancy and I, both not being in the room and also not being in the room with each other or being in the room face to face with all of you. And I hope we've presented some ideas and some information that will be helpful as you're moving forward. We're both available if you have follow-up questions, and again, through contacting either Kathy or our email addresses are on your screen right now. Feel free to contact us, and again, visit those websites. The community, like Nancy mentioned, their Communities for All Ages website just has pretty much all the information you could need to get some of this work started and moving forward with the intergenerational lens. So Nancy, I'll let you, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to wish you all luck. I hope that you continue in your good efforts. It sounds like that a lot has been going on, and I think both Sherry and I would love to hear how things progress, and we hope to hear good things, and good luck to you.
So again, thank you for joining us. Please don't hesitate to contact us with any additional questions, and again, yeah, good luck, and we look forward to talking with you all soon. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Nancy, for joining us.
Sure.